You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Howdy, gentlemen.
Hey, good morning.
Morning.
All right. Hey, have you guys ever heard of this thing called artificial intelligence?
No, I never did. What is that all about?
Well, what do you imagine? I mean, given the name artificial intelligence, it sounds futuristic and sci-fi, and it sounds intelligent. What do you think?
I think it'd be a great idea, particularly since we haven't found many examples of organic intelligence.
Oh boy, the cynic man. I mean, so the problem.
Well, I mean, we're relying on that organic intelligence to produce the artificial intelligence as well.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the problems with artificial intelligence is the name. The name is stupid, and AI people realized this back in like the late 50s. They're like, we chose the wrong name, but we're stuck with it. They weren't, because there was only like a dozen people who had any interest in this until about 1980, and then it became 24 people, and now it's everybody thinks it's the most amazing thing, and they think that computers can think for themselves. They can think. I mean, we've all played probably with, ChatGPT and Google's Gemini and whatnot, and think, I typed in something, it gave me a response. It seems intelligent. I want to point out to listeners, there is no intelligence happening at all. It's really clever programming that basically does statistical analysis to say, hey, here's probably what would come next in this sentence. Fair enough to say, Fred, as our technical wizard?
I think that's fair enough to say, yes, sir.
All right.
Cross correlation is not the same thing as intuition.
Great. I knew my undergraduate degree was not a waste, it would come in handy one day. So we have a piece, an opinion piece in the New York Times we're linking to, and it is titled AI in the Silicon Valley Hype Machine. Now, Silicon Valley and hype, come on, that seems a little egregious. But I want to quote from this. There was no pause. This is about basically researchers saying, hey, we need to have a 6-month pause on the development of AI so we can, because there's a fear they're going to become too powerful and will risk loss of our civilization. So quoting from the article, there was no pause. But now, a year later, the question isn't really whether AI is too smart and will take over the world. It's whether AI is too stupid and unreliable to be useful. Consider this week's announcement from OpenAI's chief executive, Sam Altman, who promised he would unveil new stuff that feels like magic to me. But it was just rather a routine update that makes ChatGPT cheaper and faster. And why are we talking about this on an auto safety podcast? Because I don't know.
I'll tell you why. I mean, there's another quote later in the article from Molly White, who is a cryptocurrency researcher and critic, and this quote is great to me because it brings up a lot of familiar feelings. She says, I find my feelings about AI are actually pretty similar to my feelings about blockchains. They do a poor job of much of what people try to do with them. They can't do the things their creators claim they one day might, and many of the things they are well suited to do may not be altogether that beneficial. Which to me sounds almost exactly like what we've seen going on in the autonomous world and in the Tesla world of pretend autonomy.
Well, let's remember that these pronouncements are generally coming from the CEOs of these companies, and the CEO's responsibility is to pump the stock price. That's what they get paid to do, and every word that comes out of their mouth is oriented towards pumping the stock price. So the relationship to reality is often pretty tenuous.
So you're being cynical again. You think that these shareholders and investors and institutional analysts are gullible?
I think
it's not that they're gullible. It's that they're not concerned about safety. They're concerned about money.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a great opinion piece, and it's going to tie into the next thing we're going to cover is from MSN. We have a link titled Driverless Waymo Vehicle Glitches While Driving in Metro Phoenix. Watch the video. And so these cars are using some level of artificial intelligence. Again, more artificial than intelligent. Very clever, mathematical inference machines essentially that say, "Hey, I'm going to guess this what should happen next," right? So according from the article, in the past, Waymos have been spotted stalled in downtown Phoenix and routinely idling in certain neighborhoods. However, a new video getting attention on social media shows a Waymo repeatedly swerving to the bike lane while driving in Phoenix. This video is awesome, and
No, it's not awesome. It is a big yikes.
it's awesome because it goes against the argument that people have for self-driving cars all the time, and that number one thing is autonomous vehicles don't drive drunk. But if you watch this video, the car is drunk.
The Waymo's drunk.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so this is part of Waymo being investigated. Sorry, Michael.
I was just going to say, this is it. Also, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on there, if it's struggling to see around the trailer in front of it or what, but it is pretty clearly not identifying the bus and bike lanes. It looks like it's one of those wide lanes at first where buses and bikes travel, and then it converts to a bike lane only. And the Waymo is not only crossing into the bike lane, it occasionally crosses into, over the divider in the center lane. So that's a significant problem. And yes, that vehicle looks like it's being operated by someone who is impaired.
Oh,
is
Fred,
that really a
muted.
problem? Because, I would think that before they put these vehicles on the road, there would be some way for law enforcement to stop the vehicle if it's acting erratically. Isn't that part of what they have to do, Michael? Isn't that a requirement?
I don't know what they would charge the vehicle with if they pulled it over. I mean, the solution here, I guess, would be to box that vehicle in and not allow it to move until you'd contacted Waymo. And they came and picked it up, take it off the road. But it raises the question, if you put every Waymo vehicle on that stretch of road, are they all going to be doing the same thing? And what's the problem here? Well, I mean, it's a pretty big gap there between what you hear the AV industry saying about how well they're performing and what we're seeing on the road. This is just the latest example of that.
So your answer is no. There's no way for law enforcement to stop it. Is that correct?
There's no way for law enforcement to directly send a signal and stop the vehicle. I assume they could, call Waymo. I believe Waymo was the company that recently said they are, putting the ability for first responders and people to actually talk to the vehicle, to communicate with the remote operator when those vehicles are having problems. So, they might be able to eventually stop that vehicle. But it's I don't know. There's not a button that they can hit and stop it immediately for driving like that. Similar to how, the same thing exists when they're trying to stop a human who's driving drunk. That human might pull over, that human might not pull over. And sometimes you might have to resort to some, interesting tactics, maybe not so safe, to get that driver to stop.
Hey, maybe we could approach HBO and, do a series on drunk AV history.
Oh, I love it. I think this is a good one. But this brings up a question. So I hear regularly outside my window, the police get on their, I don't know, their loud hailer or whatnot through their car and be like, pull over, go past the traffic light, pull over to the right, pull over to the right, pull over to the right. Like, so they're regularly doing that. It's, I have PTSD from it. But so if a cop is behind one of these vehicles and they get on, their megaphone and they're like, hey, pull over, pull over, pull over. There's no one in the car driving it. There's a passenger in the back playing, Wordle. And so I imagine with Waymo, they have remote operators, but they don't have, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So someone gets an alert maybe on a screen and is like, oh, wait, what?
Yeah, I don't know how that works. You would have to assume. I mean, I know that the police in Phoenix probably have a phone number in all of their phones that tells them, call, here's the number for Waymo. If you see one of their vehicles acting up, call this number, and the remote operator can then, either take over and stop that vehicle or take it out of service or whatever they do. But, it's something that all the autonomous vehicle companies really need to work on is communication with local law enforcement, fire departments, emergency services. I mean, we've seen this before on a grand scale in San Francisco and all the problems they had there. And, Waymo has performed better than Cruise in a lot of metrics, but, we're definitely starting to see some issues arise. This, the NHTSA opened the investigation, I believe it was last week, when into that incident and many other incidents, but I think particularly into the incident when the Waymo was crossing the center line to pass the unicyclists. And now we see another Waymo doing something that's every bit as dangerous. And it's a big concern. And it becomes even bigger when you realize that the industry groups that are supporting this technology are out there pretending that none of this happens.
Oh, Michael, it sounds like you're describing Godzilla running rampant through the streets beyond the control of security forces.
Well, with Waymos are not breathing fire yet, and they're not stepping on buildings. But
I beg to differ. They do catch on fire.
I think all of these AV vehicles need to have what are on a lot of 18-wheelers, and the back says, how's my driving? Call this number. You're driving shit. Like it's scary. That's how your driving is right now. Right now, you're driving drunk and you claim you don't. It's almost like we're being gaslit.
Oh.
All right. Next story in Ars Technica. Tesla must face fraud suit for claiming its cars could fully drive themselves. Speaking of being gaslit, Elon Musk, everybody, the world's greatest gaslighter, BS artist. A federal judge ruled yesterday that Tesla must face a lawsuit alleging that it committed fraud by misrepresenting the self-driving capabilities of its vehicles. Basically, for those of you playing the home game, since 2015, Elon Musk has said that self-driving is a solved problem. It'll be ready next year. 2016, it'll be ready next year. 2017, it'll be ready next year. 2018, why are people still listening to this guy? Further in the article, the complaint also sufficiently alleges that Musk falsely represented the vehicle's future ability to self-drive cross-country, and that Lo Savio, the plaintiff, relied upon these representations pre-purchase. The judge concluded, I think, I got confused there, sorry. Musk claimed at an October 2016 news conference that a Tesla car would be able to drive from Los Angeles to New York City by the end of next year without the need for a single touch. I think somebody who doesn't need a single touch is Elon Musk. Yeah, so fraud, not fraud.
I think it's clearly fraud, and it's we were calling it fraud, right around 2016, 2017 when it was happening. I mean, it's pretty clear. The Tesla website was saying, these vehicles come equipped with the hardware necessary for full self-driving, and it's 2024, and we still don't think that the vehicles they're selling come equipped with that, and they certainly didn't in 2016. And it's a massive fraud. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to represent the situation. Tesla has made a lot of money, and Tesla stockholders have made a lot of money off of the investments made in the company based on this fraud. And now you see Musk even doubling down on the robotaxi joke that we just don't see happening. And I don't know what else to call it at this point other than a massive fraud. I mean, and everyone who paid for full self-driving, you're still getting a car. So the car itself is not fraudulent. You're getting a car. But if you paid for the full self-driving, you should certainly be refunded that amount, because you're never going to get there in the vehicles they produced so far.
Yeah, are you a listener? Are you a Tesla stockholder, shareholder? Have you made over 1,000% return? Because if so, you can donate to the Center for Auto Safety with some of your winnings.
Oh, good segue. Good segue.
I hope you sold before the recent 60% drop in your share value. But seriously, donate. That's good. Another Ars Technica article compares Waymo and Tesla. and it's titled "On Self-Driving, Waymo is playing chess while Tesla is playing checkers." I think they're both playing a different game. It's called "Screw You, the Public." That's pretty much it.
Well, I
But
think the
Well, I
better
mean,
better
go ahead,
analogy would
Fred.
be facing a firing squad versus Russian roulette, I think.
oh, excellent, Michael. What was your take?
Yeah, I could see that. That makes sense too, because I think my take is that if I had to choose a vehicle to hop in and ride around town in right now, it would be a Waymo 1,000 times over a Tesla with full self-driving. Simply because I know that Waymo has better sensors, appropriate sensors, maybe for the circumstances. Waymo probably has redundancies in place that I don't believe Tesla's willing to invest in. And, frankly, I'm going to say the T word trust here that the AV industry keeps repeating. I trust way more than I trust Tesla.
Fair enough. And so the take on this is that Waymo is saying their approach is saying, "Hey, we're in this operating these limited operating design domains. We have redundant sensors. We're not just relying on cameras, and we have remote operators that will get involved." And right now, this has been more or less kind of okay, uh,
Yeah.
because they have a lot more remote operators involved who can take over and intercede because they're happening in metro areas with good cell phone coverage and whatnot. But when they're traveling on a freeway at 60, 70 miles per hour, somebody sitting in, Kalamazoo is not going to be able to respond in time. You're dead. I'm sorry. You've hit the barrier. You've hit whatever. There's just physics. There's no way for that remote operator who's probably watching dozens of vehicles to be like, "Oh, let me get, oh no. Oh no. Oh, I missed that one." It's like the worst air traffic controller.
Yeah, and there were some interesting things in this article and further evidence of a difference between Waymo and Tesla. Waymo programs its vehicles when they encounter a problem, they, basically, and they don't think it's safe to proceed, they basically slow to a stop and call into headquarters and say something's wrong here. Whereas a Tesla tries to shift the burden over onto the driver who should be monitoring the system, but isn't always doing a good job of that. And it was interesting, that Waymo is saying that remote operators don't directly drive those vehicles. Essentially, when a Waymo encounters a problem and pulls over to a stop and calls into headquarters, it's not calling in for an operator that's going to take up a joystick and control the vehicle and get it through the situation. They basically the remote operator answers questions that the car is asking and kind of builds the vehicle's confidence that it can move in the right direction, which is an interesting way to do it. But it seems like that might get around some of the problems we've identified with latency, because you don't have an operator directly controlling the vehicle, and that problem with a delay in commands or delay in detecting objects or other problems that are in the vehicle's path.
Michael, you're exactly right. How unusual is that? I mean, this is the same technique basically that NASA is using to control very remote operations in space. For example, it takes several minutes for a radio signal to reach from Earth to Mars. So what they do is they make sure that the reentry vehicle has got the right trajectory. They make last minute adjustments, but then the vehicle's on its own. It's got its own control system. It's got to react instantly to whatever circumstances it finds. This is actually an excellent way to set up a control system. Only time will tell whether or not Waymo has enough capability on board to handle the complexity of open traffic and unregulated, traveling through all kinds of streets and circumstances. But it's actually a very good way to set up the control system, and hats off to them for doing that. It's very difficult as well. It takes a lot of engineering, but it is potentially an excellent solution.
But is this a good approach when on freeways, when you're traveling at 70 miles per hour and some tractor trailer jackknifes in front of you?
Yeah, it's hard to say there because it's not the vehicle's not really going to stop. You don't really have areas to stop and wait for commands on interstates. I mean, you do have a shoulder on some interstates, not all in the cities. It's less likely that you're going to have them where Waymo is operating. And the speeds involved. You simply, if you encounter an issue, you're probably not going to be able to dial home and get an answer before you've encountered that problem. So
No, I think that's completely right. There's no way you can expect remote driving to handle instant hazardous conditions on a highway.
Right, because I'm imagining, some space vehicle coming back in reentry. There's no options of somebody walking their dog in front of it. There's no, everything in the sky is going to be known.
Well, actually,
No?
kind of, sort of, but not really, because you've got weather, don't forget. And
Um,
weather is, you got winds and crosswinds, and who knows what you're going to encounter on the way down. No, there's no space dogs up there, but there are variables. And also, when you are about to land, you don't know whether you're going to land in a gully or on top of a mountain. So there's decisions that need to be made in the instance before touching down. So
hmm.
yeah, no space dogs, but still a lot of variables.
No space dogs. Hey,
yeah, I'm really
listeners.
upset now.
I mean, wait, the Russians had a space dog. Come on.
Oh, poor Leica.
This article goes on talking about how the Tesla fan folks are saying that, hey, well, Tesla's approach is better because they've got nonsense coming out of their mouth. And on a favorite neo-Nazi holiday coming up in August, Elon will release the robotaxi. Uh, I think it's fair to say if you're listening to this, you're probably sober right now, and you're probably not delusional, and you realize that the robotaxi won't happen. At best, they'll have a guy dressed up in a robotaxi costume who'll dance for you.
But listeners, if there is somebody who's got a drinking game associated with this podcast, please let us know. We'd love to know how that works.
All right, that's enough of our AVs for this episode, I believe. Let's jump on into the law. The law. So we've talked about this a number of times in the show about, hey, cars are now computers on wheels and they've got cameras and microphones and they're listening to you. Just right now, you're listening to us. Oh my God. So now it's coming out. Automotive News recently reported that 8 automakers sent vehicle location data to police without a court order or warrant. The 8 companies told senators that they provided police with data when subpoenaed, getting a rise from several officials. BMW, Kia, Mazda, Mercedes-Benz, Nissan, Subaru, Toyota, and Volkswagen presented their responses to lawmakers. Senators Ron Wyden from Oregon and Ed Markey from Massachusetts penned a letter to the FTC urging investigative action. Automakers have not only kept consumers in the dark regarding their actual practices, but multiple companies misled consumers for over a decade by failing to honor the industry's own voluntary privacy principles. This is bad. We don't want your car to spy on you.
Well, it kind of points out the problem, and it's something the auto industry does across its operations, not just in privacy, but the industry is always proposing voluntary guidelines and principles. They did it with automatic emergency braking. They're currently doing it with cybersecurity. They want to make their own laws. They don't want government regulators telling them how they're going to operate their businesses. So they often try to preempt government action by saying, whoa, wait, we've got this taken care of. Just trust us. We're going to do this, and enforce this against, the members of our coalition. And you know what? Here you go. 10 years ago, they basically said, here you go, FTC. Here are our principles. If you see us breaking these principles, feel free to pile on to us and do something about it. Well, it took the SEC about 10 years to do that. And they're slowly, the FTC slowly seems to be coming out on this issue and trying to enforce some sort of consumer privacy protection for people who are buying vehicles and aren't told what those vehicles are collecting and how they're distributing that data.
So I have a car. I'm driving around. It's collecting not only where I drove, how fast I drove, braking events. We've discussed. I can't remember which manufacturer is collecting your sexual preferences. A whole bunch of crazy stuff. Isn't there some sort of protection for me as a consumer? I mean, it's my car. I own it. Don't I own the data that my car is collecting?
Oh, you're so cute, Anthony. No, it's Wild
Yeah.
West.
How is that like I'm looking like anything else I own like isn't it my data, isn't it my information, and isn't it
Well,
wouldn't it be illegal to just hand this over to anybody who asks for it?
apparently not. I mean, you don't own the software in your phone either.
No.
That's licensed.
I
Right.
think and the problem here really, you know, you probably don't own your data. I mean, you may own a part of it, and but when you buy that vehicle, you've often signed or initialed or checkboxed away your sole right to determine and control, what happens with that information. And a lot of there's some interesting parts of the report that it was Senator Ron Wyden who led this effort, and they put out a report that goes through kind of what happens and with each automaker in certain situations. And there are all this kind of data can be used in law enforcement investigations, for instance. And the say the FBI is investigating a drug trafficking ring, and they want the locations of certain individual so that they can figure out if that person was in proximity to a known delivery spot or whatever it might be. Um, I believe there's only one manufacturer, that's Tesla, which tells its customers when law enforcement or a judicial subpoena or government subpoena has been issued seeking information on that person. All of the other manufacturers don't provide their customers with any such notice. So that's, I guess that's a point in Tesla's favor, although essentially the consumers just don't really have a good idea of what the information is that their car is collecting, and what the companies are doing with it. And that's a two-way street here, folks. If you're buying a car, you need to do your due diligence here, because manufacturers are perfectly willing to take consumer naivety. How do you pronounce that word? I don't know, but they're willing to use that against you so that they can collect your information without you knowing it and monetize it and do other things with it. So it's critical for consumers when they're buying a vehicle, and particularly connected vehicles these days, to be to understand going in that there is going to be data collected on you, and that you need to opt out where you can if you don't want that data being collected. And you need to understand that there may be some things that are being collected that you're not going to have control over, that may be subject to subpoena, may be subject to all sorts of leaks. I've experienced at least two data leaks in the last year that exposed all of my information to the dark web. And that is a huge possibility for, your vehicle GPS data, or for your contact list, or anything that's stored in the vehicle. And so it's critically important that consumers be aware here and not trust that this information is going to be protected.
Well, we had a story last week about a Tesla Cybertruck that had been stolen, and the owner was able to trace it very rapidly by tracking its data, and vectored the police into the Cybertruck, which was then recovered, and the thief was apparently arrested. But it's important to note that if a bad actor had equal access to the data in the Cybertruck, um, and someone else's Cybertruck was able to, track and understand exactly where the occupant was and what they were doing, that could be a really, really bad thing. So the capability of tracking your truck when it's stolen has got to be modulated so that bad actors cannot hijack the truck, cannot hijack that data capability, and do bad things to your property or yourself.
I wonder if there's a new app that's going to come out, basically like ad block for cars. Because in my home network, I can, my internet provider and everybody else will try to get the data. My TV has like an Ethernet port in it, and I'm like, I'm not hooking that up. Why do they need to know? Like, there's got to be a way to do that with cars. And Michael, I apologize again for selling your information on the dark web, but not enough people went to autosafety.org and click donate. You do that, I'll steal less
Another
of
good
Michael's
segue.
data.
Yeah.
In a related New York Times article about this, a lot of people ask, well, who cares if my data is collected out there? I'm not doing anything wrong. Problem with that is, what's the definition of wrong, or how people are doing this? So there's a great quote from this New York Times article. As far right politicians escalate their war on women, I'm especially concerned about cars revealing people who cross state lines to obtain an abortion, Senator Wyden said in a statement. And this is a perfect example of how your data can be used without your consent for very private reasons and whatnot. And that's frightening. There ought to be laws for that.
There ought to be a law for that.
Yeah.
It's very concerning, that you could have, a state can at this point can issue a subpoena or, demand essentially the data on someone who leaves that state for the purposes of acquiring an abortion, which is it's not really our subject here at the Center for Auto Safety, but when privacy data is being used that way, it's very concerning that a state actor can take that kind of path. And I don't know, it just feels creepy to me that we're entering an era where that's possible.
Yeah. Speaking of more creepy, let's go to a different angle. I think this is sad. It's not something we ever talk about, but we all know who made our phones and who made our clothes, and it's something we just pretend isn't true. Well, automakers got caught with this. A congressional investigation found that BMW, Jaguar Land Rover, and Volkswagen purchased parts that originated from a Chinese supplier flagged by the United States for participating in forced labor programs in Xinjiang, a far western region of China where the local population is subject to mass surveillance and detention. Basically, they're using slave labor to make your cars. Isn't it bad enough that they're making our clothes and our phones? Now they got to make our car. This is too dark for this time of day?
No, this is something we discussed, a while back. We talked about the Uyghurs and the forced labor in China. And, there is a law that was passed, I believe, in 2021 to address this. And Ron Wyden and a number of senators looked into this issue and found that, automakers are basically sticking their head in the sand. And they swear they can't find any forced labor in their supply chains. And one of the issues here is that supply chains are massive. Every vehicle has 30 or 40,000 parts, and you're having to build those parts all over the world. And yes, it is a massive undertaking to keep track of your parts. But the fact is, the automakers are the only ones who can do that. And they're the only ones who can verify that they're not getting parts from places where forced labor is taking place. And so it's their responsibility and no one else's to make this happen. And they found that BMW had actually imported cars containing parts from this area in China where there is a prohibition on manufacturers using parts from that area. Jaguar and Land Rover, and they imported parts from that area, and Volkswagen manufactured cars with those components that were from a supplier banned for Uyghur forced labor. So another area where the automakers aren't doing a great job policing themselves. And essentially, if they're not policing themselves in this area, then they are supporting forced labor in China. And it's something that I think, and I think I agree with Mr. Wyden, that they need to do more here, and that they're trying to ignore a problem that's critical.
Well, egregious labor practices are not limited to China. Remember last year, I think it was last year, that it was reported that Kia and Hyundai were using illegal child labor in their factories
Yeah,
in, where's it, Mississippi and Alabama?
it was Georgia and Alabama, I believe it
Yeah,
was.
somewhere
Have
in
a
the
plant
south.
in Mississippi. Yeah, yeah, and it was when they were essentially, and that's they were, I believe it was they suppliers surrounding the Kia or the Hyundai plant. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the one in Alabama and Montgomery. Um, were employing underage children, some of whom were even involved in, software programming and other things that sounds like a really shady practice. So, yes, the only reason that, there's a law that prohibits manufacturers from using components from the areas in China where forced labor is happening, but there isn't a law preventing the import or the manufacture of vehicles from anywhere else on earth where those practices might be taking place. So this is, that area of China was a particularly bad area for that, but automakers are probably and most likely, and I'd have to say they are using forced labor in some form in a number of countries in the world that may not be China. And it's probably an area where there needs to be a lot more law in place. And we really need to get automakers to do a better job in their supply chain of ensuring that they're not, supporting slavery in many respects.
Right. And I think as a consumer, the best thing you can do is continue to listen to this, share it with your friends, because we've rattled off a lot of manufacturers' names today. But I've noticed absent from the list are the three U.S. car companies: Ford, GM, and well, Chrysler Stellantis. Is that what they're called now? But
Yes, Stellantis.
they don't seem to be the
And
ones
they're in
sharing data.
France now, essentially. So
Oh,
although they manufacture a significant portion of their vehicles and parts in the United States, they are a French company.
all right. Let's
So is it
They were
big,
Italian and they were German before that. So Chrysler's had a long road.
Fred.
I was just going to say they're the big trois now.
he and now that Fred, you're talking, let's go to the Tao of Fred and a new feature we're going to talk about that's separate from the Tao, but Fred's going to introduce it in this week's Tao. And is that confusing enough for me and the AI software transcribing this that will do it as the
You've
Tao
now
of
entered
Fred?
the Tao of Fred.
So the new section is going to be a gaslight illumination, because there's so much gaslighting around, but it simply doesn't get the publicity that it deserves. And so what this is going to be a reader or listener participation game, by the way. So we'll be looking for your input as well. But to give you a sample of the kind of thing that we're going to talk about, we are fortunate to have listened to lies and misrepresentation by Jeff Farah, Chief Executive Officer of Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, in Senate testimony yesterday. So sorry?
I said, oh boy.
Yeah, it's interesting how people just are unintimidated by the need to present accurate information to Congress. I guess that's a new thing. Anyhow, a couple of instances, he says that our mission is to bring the tremendous safety, mobility, transportation, and economic benefits of AVs to consumers and businesses in a safe, responsible, and expeditious manner. Well, that's great, but there is no evidence that there is any tremendous safety, mobility, transportation, or economic benefits of AVs, except the ability of extracting dollars from investors in these companies that actually are kind of scammy. So he goes on to say, this is all on the first page, the vehicles operated by AVIA members, Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association members, have driven nearly 70 million miles on U.S. public roads. Well, that's actually interesting, because it was 7 million last week, and then all of a sudden it became 70 million. But there's been no outside review of where those miles occurred. Were they on restricted roads? Were they on restricted paths? Is it open highways? So we don't know where it was, and we don't know what the circumstances were. But what we do know is that one of the AVI members is a company called Uber. many others, but they include Waymo, Cruise, Aurora. And we know a lot of these companies have problems, but we know that a pedestrian was killed by Uber while operating on autonomously on U.S. public roads. So for them to say that, they have demonstrated the tremendous safety is absolutely unsupportable, because even if you look within their members, there has been a death and serious injury by Cruise, as well as a lot of other accidents within that unsupportable 70 million miles that they've driven. Now, for reference, NHTSA says that conventionally driven vehicles have a fatal crash roughly once every 110 million miles. So we're looking at, even if you give them the benefit of the doubt that those 70 million miles are representative, you're still looking at least roughly twice the fatality figures for these AVs in the AVIA members as for conventionally driven vehicles. So these claims of safety have absolutely no support. But the testimony goes on in continued gaslighting. It's actually a very interesting example of gaslighting, because like so many of the AV documents that are around, there's so many AV disquisitions or speeches, whatever, that are around. They very carefully mix tenses. So, and it's very misleading, because they say that, for example, AVs are poised to significantly improve roadway safety, as they do not speed, they do not text, and they do not drive while impaired by alcohol, drugs, or fatigue. Well, that's fine, but they're also slow to respond to complex stimuli, and they act as though they are drunks. They often misinterpret their circumstances, like drunks. They swerve uncontrollably. We talked about one of those videos this morning. They make wrong turns like drunks. We have videos of Waymos going up the wrong side of limited access highways. They are easily distracted, particularly by things like photos on the side of trucks and text on the side of trucks. And any 2-year-old, or maybe not any 2-year-old, but typical 2-year-olds can look out a window and say, there's a truck, right? There's a fire truck, there's a school bus. They often fall in love with these things. AVs have a lot of difficulty doing that, because AVs see a scattering of data. They're easily distracted by discontinuities in that data. And it's a big, big challenge for them to interpret, for example, the side of a truck that has a picture of a plumber and text that says, stop leaks, from a person crossing a road next to a stop sign. The trucks or the AVs struggle with that. So this whole idea that they're never distracted is unsupportable. It's completely wrong. They then go on to talk about a canard, or I should say Mr. Farah goes on to say, by removing human error as a cause of roadway accidents, AVs can help reduce roadway deaths, saving the lives of countless Americans. Well, that goes back to a canard of a misinterpretation of a study that NHTSA did on crash causality a long time ago that said 94% of the crashes that occur have a critical component that involves human beings. The correct way to interpret that is, and I thank Phil Koopman for this because he discussed this week, that if human beings had known what was going on and had been able to respond in 94% of the circumstances, they might have avoided the crash. That's a long way from saying the humans caused the crash, right? It's what it's really saying is that things happen so fast and so unfortunately that the humans couldn't respond in time. Very, very different take on those numbers. It's very important to demythologize this whole idea that the AVs are going to reduce highway deaths by 90 some odd percent. But it's also important to note that by removing human judgment from driving control and exposing the public to a wide range of lethal data processing and novel personal security issues, for example, authorization of commands, the identification of the person giving the command, and cybersecurity, the hazards of death are greatly increased in ways that are simply not present with a human driver. But, again, going back to whether or not any of this is supportable, the statistics on death and injury caused by AVIA members is much greater than the numbers that are out there for human drivers, even including the really bad human drivers that are out there. So there's just nothing here that's supportable. But then they go on to say things like access to food is another area of equality that AVs can help alleviate. Well, they cannot help alleviate that. Okay. It's simply not possible. Now, maybe someday in the future, pie in the sky, by and by, they would be able to do that, but they cannot do that. They also
Wait,
say that AV.
I'm sorry, by access to food, is this the self-driving pizza truck?
Oh man, yeah. Well, Neuro does that, right? They deliver pizza, but I think there's only a couple of square miles where they do that. But they just go on to talk about an endless list of benefits as though they are actually out there and doing that. AVs can prove particularly useful for improving access to food, blah, blah, blah. They cannot do that. They don't do that. Maybe someday. Finally, they go on and say something. Well, the integration of AVs into America's commercial fleets will help optimize the transportation of freight nationwide. No support for that. Absolutely no evidence that that has ever happened. And will it ever happen in the future? Could be, but at the moment, it's all bullshit. It's all gaslighting. And it says for consumers, the AVs are positioned to reduce general transportation costs. Where is that? AVs cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to build and operate. And maybe there will someday be a robotaxi, but the economics of such robotaxis and the economics of reliance on AV transportation are simply not supported by any business model that's based upon the actual capabilities of these vehicles. So when they say use the present tense, AVs are positioned, well, what they really should say, AVs might, by and by, pie in the sky, do some good for these things. Pit's bad, pie in the sky, by and by. It's important to discriminate the pit's bad from the reality. Now, finally, they do go on to say something that's honest. And towards the end, they say the American AV industry is at an inflection point as the technology is now being commercialized and the benefits of AVs are beginning to accrue. Well, maybe, at least the tense is correct, are beginning to accrue. But whether the benefits are beginning to accrue or the actual penalties associated with AV use is still unresolved. So I leave you with that Mr. Farah, gosh, it just has no shame, and good for him. I guess that's what the AV industry is all about right now.
Well, big shout out to Jeff Farah, this week's Gas Pass winner. Gassiest, most flatulent individual of the week, something like that. We'll work on that. So one thing you briefly touched on there was the autonomous trucks and the 18-wheelers. And this is a question I have because I believe it was Volvo is coming out with their production-ready self-driving 18-wheeler truck.
Aurora Volvo, yeah.
Yeah, the Aurora thing. And we've talked about Aurora in the past, and they've got all the sensors and the whole thing, and they've been running tests, and hey, this is going to save money because we won't need a driver anymore, and it will go from hub to hub. And it got me thinking that wouldn't it be cool if we had something where you can, instead of having an 18-wheeler that you could pull I don't know, 50 cargo containers on dedicated path that you're not going to interfere with traffic and go from hub to hub, and maybe you just have those 50 things. You just got 2 people monitoring it. And we could call it railroads.
Call it a train. What a great idea.
Yeah. So
it's a great idea unless you're in a Tesla on full self-drive.
well, there's not going to make it. But why? I mean, this is very much off topic, I think, for an auto safety discussion, but why aren't we just using rail for these things? Get the 18 wheels off the road. We have a rail network. Just do that. Okay,
There's a
no one
lot
wants
of
to raise
there's a lot of
Oh,
there's
Yeah,
a lot of history there.
yeah, we just
Yeah.
broke Michael. So earlier today, Fred hit him with something, he stumbled. Then Fred hit him again with something else, and he stumbled, and his face just compressed in the most interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, going into the, I don't know. I like the idea of trains running everything we need them to run across America and not having to deal with 18 wheelers as I drive down I-81. But the train industry has its own issues, and I don't know, and maybe that's a solution. That's a tough question. That's why my face crinkled up, because I don't have any answers there.
Yeah, but let's remember that when a motorist is on the road or a pedestrian is on the road, if they're in the proximity of a train, they generally know it. The train stops the horn before the crossing. Gates go down. They make a lot of noise. Yes, there are still occasionally collisions and crashes between people and trains, sometimes intentional. But a lot of energy and thought has gone into protecting people and vehicles from the hazard associated with the train. There is no thought going into protecting people from the hazards associated with self-driving trucks, except to say, trust me, we have a great control system, and gosh, we wouldn't do anything because it would harm our business model. There's just, there's no there there.
There's no there. Let's move on to one more article before we get into recalls. So this is always a complaint about electric vehicles that, oh, the battery's going to die and then you got to replace the whole battery and that's like 20 grand. These things are dumb. And I'm all for electric vehicles because in my mind, I'm going to live with a place with a full solar farm, or, my energy is going to be powered by dolphin smiles, something really good, and there won't be any problems. And so here's an article from KUOW, and it's someone talking about their Tesla Model S from 2013, how they'd driven up from Portland to Seattle to visit their daughter, and when it was time to head home, she turned on her car and was met with a blank screen. Tesla ran diagnostics and discovered the battery was fried. They said, well, it needs to be replaced, and that's expensive. Expensive meant as much as $20,000, which is basically what the car's Blue Book value was worth at the time. And now that sounds crazy, but I think Tesla wants to sell you a new car. And this article talks about a little repair shop where what they do is, no, we fix these batteries. So what this does is there's not enough people trained on how to fix these batteries. So instead of replacing the entire thing, they go in there and they find the cells that have died and broken and just replace those little parts, which makes a lot, and it's a lot cheaper than 20 grand, which makes a lot more sense. And this is something I think we've talked about before, whereas there's not enough independent repair shops that have been trained on this, or even manufacturers allowing people to be trained on this to open up these battery packs to replace and repair.
Well, why would they if they can just sell someone a new vehicle?
Hey,
Right? I mean, they don't have an incentive to support a network of highly skilled technicians who can repair batteries when they can sell that consumer another battery that's going to cost them $20,000. So, it's kind of,
what's happening there? What was that sound? Oh my God.
Little dog.
But there, we also have questions about whether, having folks repair damaged batteries could present, safety issues as well, because that battery has no longer been, at least past the manufacturer's safety checks before it leaves the manufacturer. So it's a very, very new industry, repairing electric batteries, and we want it to get much better, much quicker, but also we want the batteries to get a lot better so that we don't have those safety issues we have to worry about. And right now we're not there.
Well, remember, the job of the CEO of these companies, and Musk in particular, is to pump the stock price. There's not much about repairing these cars, making them repairable, that helps the stock price. In fact, one of the important tasks for Musk right now is to make sure that nobody notices that the resale value of Teslas often drops rapidly to zero. If you think of this woman's example, all right, the Kelly Blue Book value was $20,000. Cost to replace the batteries, $20,000. Michael, you're a math genius. What's the net value of the car?
It's zero.
And this
Dude,
is
that's
the
so fast.
this is becoming a widespread phenomenon in the EV industry. And if you look at the resale value of the EVs, it's not strong, not strong. People are aware that they've got a big financial burden associated with the aging of these vehicles.
I think there is one large participant in the vehicle area that would benefit here, which I think insurance companies who are having to essentially pay for new batteries every time a vehicle crashes. I mean, batteries are being replaced even in some, somewhat minor collisions. And that is really hitting car insurers hard. Electric vehicles have significantly increased their payouts. And I think we discussed a couple of months ago with how the insurance industry is no longer even making money sheerly on the amount of the policies they're putting out there, having to do so through investment. And so it's a problem. It's a significant problem for the insurance industry, and they might, be willing to support a training and expanded battery repair programs across America that could prevent consumers from running into the situation of having a $20,000 battery replacement. Maybe they have, a couple of $1,000s that they can invest in a battery repair and drive the car for another 5 years.
I like that better.
But there are companies that are orienting themselves around replaceable batteries routinely rather than having cars to recharge themselves. So they've got a supply of batteries that they can swap in and out. That would be a much better model than the current technology, which basically seals the entire case and requires you to do a lot of work simply to open the case and access the cells. They're not designed for repairs. And we talked about this for Rivian, how it was not designed for repairs, and they're getting extraordinary, astronomical repair figures for relatively minor bumps and bruises that the vehicles suffer. So as part of the maturing industry, which is slow to recognize the responsibility to allow people who deign to purchase their vehicles to repair them economically.
All right. Well, listeners, check out this article in KUOW, The Sound of the Valley. I have no idea what that station is. How about some recalls?
Yep.
Big smiles, heads nodding all around, cheering. It's amazing. Fred's lighting balloons on fire. I don't know why. BMW, potentially 3,256 vehicles. The 2025 BMW X5 S-Drive 40i, X-Drive S-Drive. There's too many. Look,
Don't
you got to
list
be.
them.
I'm not going to list them. They're the BMW. They're an SUV. They may not fully conform to Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards 208, Section 2.3, Section 14.5.2, and Section 15.2. These are some of Michael's favorite and least favorite parts of the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard Act.
Yeah, they are not compliant with FMVSS 208. That's basically controls airbags, seatbelts, any occupant protections like that. And what's happening here is the sensor thinks that an occupant is belted when they're not. And so they don't get the annoying reminder, and they might end up in a crash unbelted because of that. That's something we're certainly concerned about, since seatbelts are undefeated in saving lives in cars and are by far the smartest thing you can do when you get in your car. And so that recall looks like it's not going to be going out until right after Independence Day on July 5th. So BMW owners, keep an eye out for that one. And in the meantime, make sure you stay buckled up. Whether you get whether your vehicle knows you're buckled up or not, you should know.
Yeah, this day and age, wear a seatbelt, people. Come on. Our other recall this week is from Mazda, potentially 9,914 vehicles, the 2024 Mazda CX-90. It is a hybrid electric vehicle. The brakes may activate suddenly due to false detection of certain objects at low speed. Uh-oh. Phantom braking? This is not phantom. This is
Yes.
actual braking.
Another drunk AV.
Well, it's phantom in the sense that it's occurring because it's not an actual hazard that the vehicle's stopping for. In fact, the vehicle in this case, and it's at low speed, so we're not talking about, interstate or even, city road speeds. This is at 10 to 15 miles per hour. The vehicle is essentially detecting its own reflection or another vehicle's reflection and thinking that it's an approaching object and slamming on the brakes.
So it's a case of vehicle narcissism.
Well, except the vehicle doesn't like how it looks and it slams on the brakes, right?
Vehicle body dysmorphism. I don't know.
There you go. There you go. And that's, I think they've got a software remedy for that and just a reprogramming, but it doesn't look like it's going to be coming out until mid-July. So when you're driving your Mazda CX-9 near reflective objects at 10 to 15 miles per hour, you want to keep an eye out for this.
Doesn't Mazda also make a model called the Mirage?
I don't think so. I think that's joke. Mitsubishi.
Okay.
But they do make the Miata, which is, as we all know, Anthony's favorite car ever.
I'm sure I would love. I mean, it's built for someone of my frame. I don't know, Fred, you had something good to say, but you were on mute.
I was just going to very wittily say that Tesla's coming out with a new model called Delusion.
That's a new cologne, Delusion, by Tesla. It's made by robots. So that's another episode this week. And what have we learned? We've learned that artificial intelligence is more hype. It's more hat than cattle. That Jeff Farah, for the right price, will say whatever. It's fair to say that. Sure, why not? And that we learned that AVs, while may not be drunk, drive like drunks. Anything else we've learned, gentlemen?
That's it.
The only thing I can add is drive safely, folks. We want to hear you next week.
Yes, put on your seatbelt. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.